I never imagined that buying my dream home would turn into a legal battlefield. But there I was, standing on the wraparound porch of the historic Anderson Pierce House in Charleston, South Carolina, holding a certified letter from the Pleasant Grove Homeowners Association that threatened to fine me $500 per day if I didn't replace the original 1892 windows with modern vinyl ones. My name is Zachary Abbott, and I had just turned 34 when I bought this Victorian masterpiece. I worked as an architectural historian, which meant I knew exactly what I was getting into when I purchased the house. The Anderson Pierce House wasn't just any old building. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places and protected under South Carolina's Heritage Act. Every nail, every shingle, every piece of decorative trim had historical significance. The house had survived the Civil War, multiple hurricanes, and over a century of changing architectural trends, specifically because people understood its value. The letter in my hand suggested that Sharon Whitmore, the president of the Pleasant Grove HOA, did not understand that value at all. I read the letter again, my blood pressure rising with each word. According to Sharon, the HOA board had conducted a neighborhood inspection and determined that my home was out of compliance with community standards. The list of required modifications made my stomach turn. Replace the original wavy glass windows with energy-efficient vinyl. Remove the historically accurate slate roof and install modern asphalt shingles. Paint the exterior in one of 3 approved colors, none of which matched the original paint scheme I had painstakingly researched and restored. Pave over the original brick driveway with concrete. Remove the wrought iron fence dating back to 1895. The letter concluded with a deadline. I had 30 days to submit plans for these modifications or face escalating fines. I pulled out my phone and called my real estate attorney, Marcus Chen, who had handled the purchase of the house 6 months earlier. He answered on the second ring. "Zachary, how's the house?" he asked cheerfully. "I just got a letter from the HOA demanding I basically destroy everything historic about it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marcus, they want me to replace the original windows. These are hand-blown glass panes from 1892. They're irreplaceable." There was a pause. "Forward me the letter. I need to review your HOA agreement and the deed restrictions. But Zachary, if your house is on the National Register, there should be protections in place." "That's what I thought," I said. "The house has been protected since 1987. There's no way these demands are legal." "Let me look into it. Don't respond to the HOA yet. We need to build a proper response." I spent the rest of the day in a state of anxious frustration. I had spent every penny of my savings and taken on a significant mortgage to buy this house. It wasn't just an investment or a place to live. It was my life's passion made tangible. I had spent the past 6 months carefully restoring elements that previous owners had modified over the years. I had found a craftsman who could repair the original plaster walls. I had located period-appropriate fixtures to replace the 1970s updates in the bathrooms. I had even tracked down documentation about the original paint colors used on the exterior and matched them exactly. The next morning, I received a call from Marcus. "Zachary, we have a problem," he began. "Your HOA agreement does contain language about maintaining community standards and giving the board authority over exterior modifications. However, there's nothing in the deed restrictions that mentions the historic status of your property or creates an exception for protected structures." "How is that possible?" I demanded. "The house has been on the National Register for almost 40 years. The HOA was established in 2019, Marcus explained. When the neighborhood was formally organized as a planned community, someone dropped the ball. The historic protections should have been explicitly written into the HOA governing documents, but they weren't. It creates a legal gray area. So what do I do? We're going to need to involve the South Carolina State Historic Preservation Office. They're the ones who enforce the Heritage Act. If the HOA is demanding modifications that would damage or destroy protected historic features, the state will have grounds to intervene. But you need to file a formal complaint and request a determination. I thanked Marcus and immediately began preparing my complaint to the State Historic Preservation Office. I gathered every document I had about the house. The original National Register nomination form from 1987, which detailed the architectural significance of every aspect of the structure. Photographs documenting the current condition of the house. Historical photographs from the Charleston Library Society archives showing the house at various points in its history. Letters from architectural historians supporting the significance of the property. 3 days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was even more aggressive. Sharon Whitmore had apparently decided that my lack of immediate compliance was a personal affront. The letter informed me that I was now subject to a formal hearing before the HOA board, and that failure to appear would result in automatic fines. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 7 in the evening at the Pleasant Grove Community Center. I showed up 15 minutes early with Marcus by my side and a briefcase full of documentation. The community center was a bland, modern building with fluorescent lighting and beige walls. About a dozen other homeowners sat in folding chairs, apparently there to watch the proceedings. The HOA board sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Sharon Whitmore occupied the center seat. Sharon was exactly what I had imagined. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, with an asymmetrical blonde bob and the kind of rigid posture that suggested she was perpetually ready to find fault with something. She wore a blazer with enormous shoulder pads and held a gavel that she tapped intermittently against the table. "This hearing will come to order," Sharon announced, even though everyone was already quiet. "We are here to address the continued non-compliance of Mr. Zachary Abbott regarding property standards at 412 Heritage Lane. Mr. Abbott, you have received 2 formal notices regarding required modifications to your property. You have failed to submit plans or take any action to comply. What do you have to say for yourself?" I stood up. "Miss Whitmore, my home is protected under South Carolina state law. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places and is covered by the Heritage Act. The modifications you're demanding would destroy irreplaceable historic features and are prohibited by state law." Sharon's expression didn't change. "Mr. Abbott, when you purchased property in Pleasant Grove, you agreed to abide by the HOA covenants and bylaws. Those rules apply to every homeowner equally. We cannot make exceptions simply because you prefer old-fashioned aesthetics." "This isn't about aesthetics," I said, feeling my frustration rise. "This is about state and federal historic preservation law. My house has legal protections that supersede HOA regulations." Another board member, a balding man in his 60s wearing a polo shirt with the Pleasant Grove logo, leaned forward. "We've consulted with our attorney, Mr. Abbott. The HOA has broad authority over property standards. Your deed restrictions don't mention anything about historic preservation." Marcus stood. "If I may, I'm Marcus Chen, Mr. Abbott's attorney. While the deed restrictions may not explicitly reference the historic status of the property, state law provides clear protections for properties on the National Register." The South Carolina Heritage Act specifically prohibits modifications that would damage or destroy historic features without approval from the State Historic Preservation Office. The HOA cannot legally compel Mr. Abbott to violate state law. Sharon slammed her gavel down. We are not asking Mr. Abbott to violate any laws. We are asking him to maintain his property according to community standards. This neighborhood is about consistency and property values. One house with outdated features brings down values for everyone. My house is worth 3 times what any other property in this neighborhood is worth specifically because of its historic features. I shot back. I paid $2.3 million for it. The house next to mine sold for $750,000. If anyone is bringing down property values, it's not me. Sharon's face flushed. Property values aren't just about dollars, Mr. Abbott. They're about community cohesion and maintaining standards. The board has voted and we will not make exceptions. You have 15 days to submit compliance plans or fines will begin accruing at $500 per day. The hearing concluded with nothing resolved. As I left the community center, several other homeowners stopped me. An older woman named Dorothy told me she was rooting for me. A younger couple said they thought the HOA was overstepping, but none of them were willing to speak up publicly. Sharon Whitmore had a reputation for targeting anyone who challenged her authority. Over the next week, I focused on my complaint to the State Historic Preservation Office. I submitted a detailed account of the HOA's demands and included all my documentation. I requested an official determination that the HOA's required modifications would violate state historic preservation law. I also started digging into the history of the Pleasant Grove HOA itself. What I discovered was troubling. The neighborhood had originally been developed in the 1880s as Charleston's elite residential district. Most of the original houses had been torn down in the 1960s and 1970s and replaced with suburban-style homes. My house was one of only 3 original structures remaining. When the HOA was established in 2019, it had been the brainchild of a local developer named Richard Pemberton, who owned several properties in the area. Sharon Whitmore had been installed as HOA president and had held the position ever since. I found records of multiple complaints against the HOA. They had fined an elderly veteran for displaying an American flag that was supposedly too large. They had forced another homeowner to remove a vegetable garden because it violated landscaping standards. They had even attempted to foreclose on a property when a homeowner fell behind on HOA dues during a medical crisis. 2 weeks after I filed my complaint with the state, I received a response. The South Carolina State Historic Preservation Office had reviewed my case and agreed to conduct a site visit and issue a formal determination. They scheduled the visit for the following Thursday. On Tuesday, I received yet another letter from the HOA. The 15-day deadline had passed, and fines were now in effect. According to Sharon's calculations, I owed $3,500. The letter demanded immediate payment and threatened legal action to place a lien on my property if I didn't comply. I forwarded the letter to Marcus, who assured me that we had grounds to challenge any lien. But the stress was taking its toll. I had started losing sleep. Every time I looked at my beautiful historic home, I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. Thursday arrived, and with it came Dr. Patricia Morrison from the State Historic Preservation Office. Dr. Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in a bun and sharp, intelligent eyes. She arrived in a state vehicle with a younger assistant named James carrying a camera and measurement tools. "Mr. Abbott," Dr. Morrison said as she shook my hand, "I've reviewed your complaint and the documentation you provided. I'm familiar with the Anderson Pierce House. It's one of the finest examples of Victorian Italianate architecture remaining in Charleston. The fact that the HOA is demanding these modifications is deeply concerning. We spent 3 hours conducting a thorough documentation of the property. Dr. Morrison examined every window, noting the original wavy glass and handcrafted wooden frames. She inspected the slate roof, pointing out how the tiles were laid in a decorative pattern that was specific to the 1890s. She studied the original paint colors, which I had matched using microscopic analysis of paint chips. She measured the wrought iron fence and identified the distinctive patterns that marked it as the work of a specific Charleston ironworker from the 19th century. Mr. Abbott, everything the HOA is demanding would constitute irreparable damage to a protected historic property, Dr. Morrison said as she made notes. Vinyl windows would destroy the character of the original openings. Modern roofing materials would eliminate the decorative slate pattern. The paint colors they want you to use are completely inappropriate for the period. And that fence is a significant piece of Charleston's ironwork heritage. So, what happens now? I asked. I'm going to issue a formal determination that any modifications to this property must be reviewed and approved by the State Historic Preservation Office under the Heritage Act. That determination will have the force of law. The HOA cannot compel you to make changes that we would not approve, and I can tell you right now that we would not approve any of the modifications they're demanding. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. This has been incredibly stressful, Dr. Morrison's expression turned serious. Mr. Abbott, I need to warn you. In my experience, HOAs don't back down easily, especially when they're confronted with outside authority. This Sharon Whitmore is going to fight back. You need to be prepared for that. She was right. The following Monday, I received a certified letter from the law firm of Davidson and Associates, representing the Pleasant Grove HOA. The letter rejected the authority of the State Historic Preservation Office and claimed that HOA covenants took precedence over state historic preservation regulations. It demanded immediate payment of the accrued fines, which had now reached $5,000, and stated that the HOA would begin foreclosure proceedings if I didn't comply within 10 days. I called Marcus immediately. They're threatening foreclosure. Can they actually do that? They can try, Marcus said grimly. HOAs have significant legal power when it comes to liens and foreclosures, but we have state law on our side. I'm going to file for an emergency injunction to stop any foreclosure proceedings while we resolve the underlying dispute. And I think it's time we went on the offensive. I want to file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment and attempting to compel you to violate state law. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings. Marcus filed for the injunction, which was granted by a Charleston County judge. The HOA was barred from pursuing foreclosure or collecting fines, pending a full hearing on the merits of the case. We then filed a comprehensive lawsuit arguing that the HOA had overstepped its authority and violated state historic preservation law. The HOA responded by doubling down. Sharon Whitmore sent a letter to every homeowner in Pleasant Grove, claiming that I was a troublemaker who was refusing to comply with community standards and costing the HOA thousands in legal fees. Several of my neighbors stopped speaking to me. Someone spray painted, comply, or leave on my brick driveway in the middle of the night. I filed a police report, but without witnesses or video footage, there was nothing the Charleston Police Department could do. The harassment escalated. I came home one day to find that someone had filed a false complaint with the city building department, claiming that I was doing unpermitted construction. A building inspector showed up and conducted an inspection, finding nothing wrong. Another time, the fire department appeared at my door responding to a report of smoke, which turned out to be completely fabricated. Each incident required me to take time away from work to deal with it. I started documenting everything. I installed security cameras around the property. I kept detailed records of every interaction with the HOA and every incident of harassment. Marcus assured me that this documentation would be valuable when we got to court. 3 months after the initial HOA demand, our case went before Judge Raymond Thornton in Charleston County Circuit Court. The courtroom was packed. Sharon Whitmore sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 attorneys from Davidson and Associates. I sat with Marcus, feeling my heart pound as the judge entered. Judge Thornton was an older African-American man with graying hair and a reputation for being thorough and fair. He began by reviewing the basic facts of the case. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Thornton said, looking at the HOA's attorneys. "Your client, the Pleasant Grove Homeowners Association, is demanding that Mr. Abbott make modifications to a property that is listed on the National Register of Historic Places and protected under the South Carolina Heritage Act. The State Historic Preservation Office has issued a formal determination that these modifications would violate state law, and your position is that the HOA's authority supersedes state historic preservation law. Is that accurate?" One of the HOA attorneys, a thin man in an expensive suit, stood up. "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the deed restrictions and covenants create a contractual obligation that Mr. Abbott voluntarily accepted when he purchased the property. While we respect historic preservation efforts, the law must honor private contracts and property rights." Judge Thornton turned to Marcus. "Mr. Chen, your response?" Marcus stood. "Your Honor, South Carolina law is clear. The Heritage Act provides explicit protections for properties on the National Register. Those protections cannot be waived by private contract. Additionally, compelling Mr. Abbott to violate state law would be unconscionable and contrary to public policy. The State Historic Preservation Office has the authority to regulate modifications to protected properties, and they have determined that the HOA's demands would constitute illegal damage to a historic structure." The hearing continued for 4 hours. The HOA's attorneys argued that historic preservation laws were meant to regulate government action, not private contractual agreements. They claimed that allowing me to avoid HOA compliance would undermine property rights throughout South Carolina. They presented testimony from Sharon Whitmore about how my non-compliant property was allegedly harming the neighborhood. Sharon took the witness stand wearing another aggressive blazer and a self-righteous expression. "Your Honor, this is about more than one property," she said. "If Mr. Abbott can simply ignore our rules, then every homeowner will think they can do whatever they want. Communities need standards. We have worked hard to create a neighborhood that maintains property values and aesthetic consistency. Mr. Abbott's insistence on keeping outdated features disrupts that consistency." Marcus Cross examined her methodically. "Miss Whitmore, are you aware that Mr. Abbott's property is worth significantly more than any other home in Pleasant Grove specifically because of its historic features?" Sharon hesitated. "Property value isn't just about dollars." "Please answer the question, Miss Whitmore. Are you aware that Mr. Abbott's home appraised at $2.3 million, while comparable homes in the neighborhood typically sell for under $1 million? "I'm aware that his property appraised for a high value, yes." "And are you aware that historic properties like Mr. Abbott's are a significant draw for Charleston tourism and contribute to the city's economy?" "I'm not an economist, Mr. Chen. Are you aware that the modifications you're demanding would destroy irreplaceable historic features dating back to 1892? Sharon's expression hardened. I'm aware that Mr. Abbott could easily upgrade to modern windows and roofing that would be more energy efficient and better for the environment while maintaining the general appearance of the house. Miss Whitmore, have you consulted with any historic preservation experts about whether the modifications you're demanding would damage the historic integrity of the property? We consulted with our attorney, but not with any historic preservation experts. No architects specializing in historic buildings, no historians, no one from the State Historic Preservation Office. We don't need to consult with those people. We have our community standards. Marcus paused. Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that you personally own 3 rental properties in Pleasant Grove and that you have a financial interest in maintaining strict HOA control? Sharon's face flushed. I don't see what that has to do with anything. Please answer the question. Do you own rental properties in Pleasant Grove? Yes, I own 3 properties that I rent out. And isn't it true that you market those properties by emphasizing the strict HOA standards and uniformity of the neighborhood? That's a selling point for many renters, yes. So you have a personal financial interest in enforcing HOA compliance, regardless of whether those rules conflict with state law. Sharon glared at Marcus. I have an interest in protecting property values for all homeowners, including myself. That's what an HOA president is supposed to do. The testimony continued. Marcus presented Dr. Patricia Morrison from the State Historic Preservation Office, who explained in detail why the HOA's demands would violate the Heritage Act. She brought photographs and technical documentation showing the historic significance of every feature the HOA wanted me to modify. These windows are irreplaceable, Dr. Morrison testified. The glass was hand-blown using techniques that no longer exist. The wooden frames were crafted by skilled artisans using old-growth timber. Installing vinyl windows would destroy all of that. It would be like taking a Rembrandt and painting over it with house paint. The HOA's attorneys tried to argue that modern reproductions could maintain the appearance while upgrading the functionality. Dr. Morrison shot that down immediately. Reproduction is not the same as preservation, she said firmly. The Heritage Act exists specifically to protect original historic materials and craftsmanship. Modern reproductions, no matter how carefully made, do not have the same historical value or legal protection. What the HOA is demanding would destroy a protected historic resource, and that is prohibited by state law. Judge Thornton listened carefully to all the testimony, asked detailed questions, and took extensive notes. At the end of the hearing, he announced that he would issue a written ruling within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks felt like the longest of my life. I tried to focus on my work, but I found myself constantly checking my email and waiting for news from Marcus. The harassment from neighbors continued. Someone left a note on my door calling me a selfish jerk who was costing everyone money. Another neighbor confronted me at the grocery store, demanding to know why I thought I was special and didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. I tried to explain about the historic protections, but she just shook her head and walked away. The social isolation was wearing me down. I had bought my dream home in what I thought would be a welcoming community, and instead, I found myself treated like a pariah. Finally, on a Wednesday afternoon, Marcus called. Zachary, we won. Judge Thornton issued his ruling. It's a complete victory. I felt my knees go weak. What did he say? He ruled that state historic preservation law supersedes HOA covenants, and that the HOA cannot compel you to make modifications that would violate the Heritage Act. He specifically found that the HOA acted in bad faith by refusing to acknowledge the legal protections for your property. He dismissed all the fines the HOA claimed you owed, and he awarded us attorney's fees, which means the HOA has to pay for our legal costs. "Oh my God," I breathed. "It's really over." "Not quite," Marcus said. "The HOA has the right to appeal, and knowing Sharon Whitmore, she probably will. But this is a strong ruling with solid legal reasoning. I'd be surprised if an appellate court overturned it." True to Marcus's prediction, the HOA filed an appeal, but something unexpected happened. Once Judge Thornton's ruling became public, other homeowners in Pleasant Grove started questioning the HOA's leadership. Several people who had been fined for minor violations over the years began asking whether those fines were legitimate. Someone requested copies of the HOA's financial records and discovered that Sharon Whitmore had been approving payments to her own property management company without proper board authorization. Within a month, a group of homeowners had organized a recall petition to remove Sharon from the HOA board. I stayed out of the recall effort, not wanting to seem vindictive, but I watched with quiet satisfaction as the petition gathered signatures. The state appellate court heard arguments on the HOA's appeal 6 months after Judge Thornton's ruling. By that time, Sharon had been removed as HOA president and replaced with a more reasonable board that had actually reached out to me to apologize for the harassment and stress I had endured. The appellate court issued its ruling in October. It upheld Judge Thornton's decision in full and added even stronger language about the primacy of state historic preservation law over private HOA covenants. The South Carolina Heritage Act represents a clear statement of public policy regarding the protection of our state's historic resources. The appellate opinion read, "Private contractual agreements cannot override this public policy. HOAs serve an important function in maintaining neighborhood standards, but that function must yield when it conflicts with state law designed to protect irreplaceable historic properties. To rule otherwise would create an absurd result where homeowners could be compelled to commit illegal acts simply because they agreed to HOA covenants." With the appellate ruling in place, the legal battle was finally over. The HOA dropped all demands for modifications to my property and paid Marcus's attorney fees, which totaled over $60,000. The new HOA board actually worked with me to update the neighborhood's governing documents to include explicit protections for the 3 remaining historic properties in Pleasant Grove. But Sharon Whitmore wasn't done causing problems. In December, just as I thought life was returning to normal, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I was reviewing my home insurance policy when I noticed that the coverage amount had been reduced from the appraised value of $2.3 million to just $900,000. I called my insurance company immediately. "Mr. Abbott, we received documentation from the Pleasant Grove HOA indicating that your property had significant deferred maintenance issues and did not meet community standards," the insurance representative explained. "Based on that information, we adjusted your coverage to reflect a lower property value." I was furious. That information is completely false. The HOA was attempting to force me to make modifications that would have damaged the historic integrity of the property. I won a lawsuit establishing that the property is legally protected and in excellent condition. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Abbott. We'll need to investigate this further. Can you send us the court documents?" I sent the documents and filed a complaint with the South Carolina Department of Insurance. My complaint triggered an investigation that uncovered something shocking. Sharon Whitmore had sent similar false reports to insurance companies covering several other properties in Pleasant Grove, properties owned by homeowners who had crossed her or challenged HOA authority. In one case, her false report had caused a homeowner's insurance to be canceled entirely, leaving them scrambling to find new coverage. The Department of Insurance referred the matter to the Charleston County Sheriff's Office for potential criminal investigation. Making false statements to insurance companies for the purpose of causing harm to someone else could constitute fraud and harassment under South Carolina law. In January, nearly a year after I had received that first threatening letter from the HOA, I got a call from Detective Maria Santos with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her to discuss Sharon Whitmore's conduct. I met Detective Santos at a coffee shop near my house. She was a professional woman in her 40s with dark hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She explained that the sheriff's office was investigating Sharon for multiple potential crimes, including insurance fraud, filing false reports with government agencies, and harassment. "We've identified at least 6 victims beyond yourself," Detective Santos said. She seems to have used her position as HOA president to target anyone she perceived as a threat to her authority. The insurance fraud is the most serious charge. In one case, her false report cost a homeowner over $15,000 in increased premiums and deductibles. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Your testimony and documentation. We're building a case, but we need victims willing to come forward and testify about what she did." I agreed immediately. After everything Sharon had put me through, I wanted to see justice done. The investigation continued through the spring. Detective Santos was thorough, interviewing dozens of people and gathering extensive documentation. In May, the Charleston County Sheriff's Office arrested Sharon Whitmore on charges of insurance fraud, making false statements to government agencies, and criminal harassment. The arrest made the local news. I watched the footage of Sharon being led out of her house in handcuffs, looking stunned and outraged. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. The entire ordeal had taken an enormous emotional toll. Sharon's criminal trial took place in September, nearly 2 years after this nightmare had begun. I testified about the false report she had made to my insurance company and the pattern of harassment I had endured. Other homeowners testified about their own experiences. The property owner whose insurance had been canceled testified about the financial damage Sharon's lies had caused. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Sharon Whitmore was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with 1 year suspended, and ordered to pay restitution to all the homeowners she had harmed. The judge also permanently barred her from serving on any HOA board in South Carolina. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt like a weight had been lifted. The house that had brought so much stress and conflict into my life was finally, truly mine to enjoy without fear of legal threats or harassment. I spent the next few months focusing on the positive. I completed several restoration projects that I had put on hold during the legal battles. I found a mason who could repair some damaged brickwork on the foundation using period-appropriate techniques. I hired a painter who specialized in historic homes to touch up the exterior where weather had taken its toll. I even located and purchased a period-appropriate chandelier for the main hallway that would have been original to the house's era. The new HOA board actually became supportive of my restoration efforts. They featured the Anderson Pierce House in the neighborhood newsletter and organized a historic homes tour that brought dozens of Charleston residents through Pleasant Grove. Several neighbors who had shunned me during the conflict reached out to apologize and express admiration for my dedication to preserving the property. In December, just before the holidays, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Patricia Morrison from the State Historic Preservation Office stopped by with a bottle of wine and a smile. "Mr. Abbott, I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "Your case resulted in a significant appellate court decision that strengthens historic preservation protections across South Carolina. Several other homeowners facing similar HOA conflicts have been able to use your case as precedent to protect their properties." "I'm glad something good came out of all this," I said. "There were times when I wondered if it was worth the fight." "It was absolutely worth it," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "Historic properties like yours are irreplaceable. Once they're gone forever. Every time someone stands up to protect them, it matters. You saved not just your house, but potentially dozens of others." We stood on the porch, looking out at the house's carefully restored exterior. The late afternoon sun caught the original wavy glass windows, making them glow. The slate roof tiles created intricate patterns of shadow and light. The wrought iron fence stood proud and elegant, exactly as it had for over a century. "You know what the ironic thing is," I said. "The HOA was worried about property values. But since all this happened, 2 other historic properties in Pleasant Grove have been restored by new owners who were specifically attracted by the legal protections we established. Those properties are now worth more than ever. Historic preservation and property values aren't in conflict. They go hand in hand." Dr. Morrison nodded. "That's something a lot of people don't understand. Historic districts and protected properties are economic assets. They attract tourism, they appeal to buyers willing to pay premium prices, and they give communities unique character that can't be replicated with vinyl siding and asphalt shingles." After Dr. Morrison left, I walked through the house room by room, appreciating everything I had fought so hard to protect. The original heart pine floors that showed the wear of generations. The plaster ceiling medallions with their intricate molding. The pocket doors with their antique glass knobs. The marble fireplace surrounds that had been quarried in Georgia in the 1890s. Every element told a story and connected me to the people who had lived in this house over the past century and a half. I thought about the Anderson family who had built the house in 1892, riding high on post-Reconstruction prosperity in Charleston. I thought about the Pierce family who had maintained it through the Depression and World War II. I thought about all the people who had walked these halls, looked through these windows, and called this place home. They had all been stewards of something larger than themselves. Now that responsibility had passed to me, and I had proven myself worthy of it. The legal precedent established by my case continued to have ripples. Over the next year, I was contacted by homeowners from across the Southeast facing similar conflicts with HOAs over historic properties. I shared my experience and connected them with Marcus Chen, who had developed expertise in this specific area of law. Several of those cases were resolved quickly once the homeowners cited the appellate court ruling from my case. A few required litigation, but they all ultimately resulted in victories for historic preservation. I also became involved with the Historic Charleston Foundation, joining their board and helping to advocate for stronger protections for historic properties throughout the city. We worked with the City Council to pass an ordinance clarifying that HOA regulations could not supersede historic preservation requirements within Charleston's historic districts. The ordinance became a model that other cities in South Carolina began to adopt. 3 years after that first threatening letter from Sharon Whitmore, I stood on my porch on a spring morning, drinking coffee and watching tourists walk by on the sidewalk. Several stopped to take photographs of the house, admiring its architecture. A couple with a real estate agent were touring the neighborhood, and I heard the agent pointing out the Anderson Pierce house as an example of Pleasant Grove's commitment to preserving Charleston's architectural heritage. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. My phone rang. It was Marcus Chen. "Zachary, I wanted to let you know that I just settled another case using your precedent. HOA in Columbia was trying to force a homeowner to remove original windows from a 1920s craftsman bungalow on the National Register. I sent them a copy of the appellate court ruling from your case, and they backed down immediately. My client doesn't have to spend a dime on legal fees." "That's great, Marcus. I'm glad the case is helping other people. It's more than that, Zachary. You've fundamentally changed how HOAs and historic preservation law interact in South Carolina. That's a real legacy." After we hung up, I thought about legacy. I had always believed that preserving historic buildings was important work, but I had thought of it primarily in terms of architecture and history. Now, I understood that it was also about standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. It was about refusing to let bullies and bureaucrats destroy things of genuine value in the name of conformity and control. The Anderson Pierce house stood solid and proud, just as it had for over a century. It had survived a civil war, Reconstruction, the Great Depression, multiple hurricanes, and now a battle with an HOA. It would continue to stand long after I was gone, a testament to the people who had the courage to protect it. I finished my coffee and headed inside to work on my latest project. I had tracked down the original architectural drawings for the house in an archive at the College of Charleston, and I was using them to restore a closet that had been modified in the 1950s. It was painstaking work, requiring custom millwork to match the original details, but it was exactly the kind of challenge I loved. As I measured and marked the existing structure, preparing for the restoration work, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why I had fought so hard. Not just to win a legal battle or prove a point, but to ensure that this irreplaceable piece of American architectural history would be preserved for future generations. The house deserved that. The craftsmen who had built it with such skill and care deserved that. And the principle that some things are worth protecting, even when it's difficult and expensive and legally complicated, deserved that. I thought about Sharon Whitmore, serving out her sentence and hopefully learning that authority comes with responsibility, and that power should be used to help people, not to bully them into submission. I wondered if she had any regrets, or if she still believed she had been right to try to force me to destroy historic features in the name of HOA compliance. But mostly, I didn't think about Sharon at all anymore. She was part of the past, and I was focused on the future. A future where the Anderson Pierce house would continue to stand as an example of the best of American architecture and the importance of historic preservation. A future where other homeowners facing similar battles would have legal protections and precedents to help them. A future where communities understood that historic buildings were assets to be treasured, not problems to be modernized. I spent the rest of that spring day working on the restoration, carefully documenting every step with photographs and notes for future reference. When evening came, I walked out onto the porch again and watched the sun set over Charleston. The light turned the old glass windows golden, and the slate roof tiles seemed to glow in the fading light. This was home. This was my contribution to preserving American history. And nothing, not HOA demands or legal threats or social pressure, would ever make me compromise the integrity of this remarkable building. I had won the battle to protect it, and I would continue to be its steward and defender for as long as I owned it. The story could have ended in defeat and destruction, with irreplaceable historic features torn out to satisfy an HOA's arbitrary standards. Instead, it ended in victory, with stronger legal protections for historic properties, and a precedent that would help preserve South Carolina's architectural heritage for generations to come. That was worth every moment of stress, every dollar spent on legal fees, and every sleepless night wondering if I would lose my home. As darkness fell over Charleston, I turned on the porch lights, original fixtures that I had carefully restored and rewired. They cast a warm glow over the house's facade, highlighting every architectural detail that made it special. Somewhere in the city, other historic homeowners were looking at their own properties and feeling confident that they, too, could protect what mattered. And that made everything worthwhile.